I interviewed 100 psychologists and 100 entrepreneurs. And what came out of them are these 7 traits of emotional fitness, the 7 things that emotionally healthy people are working on all the time. They are mindfulness, curiosity, self-awareness, resilience, empathy, communication, and playfulness. We tend to be very reactive with our health. It's going to cost you a lot more to wait till you're sick and then try to fix it than it is to be proactive and work out and eat healthy and sleep enough and try to prevent disease instead of fixing it. And I am trying to spread the idea that this is just as important with our emotional health, that we need to be more proactive. We need to be doing the work a little bit every day instead of waiting until things fall apart and then trying to deal with them. Let's invest in our emotional health a little bit all the time. And then when life does inevitably throw things at you, which it will, you will be much more set up.
Well, Dr. Emily, thank you for coming on our podcast to speak with us today, bringing psychology into the world of entrepreneurship. I'm curious to see where this leads. Maybe we could start with ADHD. You've described growing up with ADHD in Silicon Valley. How did that shape your curiosity or your relationship with psychology and entrepreneurship?
I think in a lot of ways. So, first of all, I realized really young that the system wasn't necessarily designed with my brain in mind. And so I would probably have to carve my own path in a particular way. And I had the privilege and support to do that. I know that's not always easy to do, but I was, I think, set up for success to figure out, all right, what is it that I need in order to do my best work? And I think I also have seen that there's a lot of overlap between ADHD and entrepreneurship, because when your superpower is for your mind to change focus rapidly and to hyper focus on things you find really interesting, it lends itself well to a startup career where things are changing all the time and you're likely very passionate about what you're doing because it's your company, etc. So all of that is in there. And then also I think I just resonate with sometimes feeling, on the outside a little bit, or that things aren't as intuitive or easy for me as they might be for other people. And so that helped me move into the world of psychology in order to support other people who are figuring out how to show up as their most authentic self in a world that doesn't always invite that.
My, I guess, first kind of realization or interaction with ADHD was actually back when it was called ADD. And I
Right.
understand that these are actually separate kind of terms, have perhaps some overlapping but distinct meanings. Could you just give like a high level overview of what ADHD is and what it is not?
Sure. So there actually isn't a separation of terms anymore. That's one thing that changed recently. Now it is all called ADHD, but there are subtypes. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And there are subtypes that relate to people who are maybe less hyperactive and more just have trouble focusing. They're the inattentive type. And then they're the types that also have that kind of somatic Energizer bunny inside, that kind of thing. And I kind of had it all. But one thing I find interesting is because we all have dopamine machines in our pocket in the form of these iPhones or, cell phones, a lot of people are showing ADHD-like symptoms, even if they don't necessarily have ADHD, because really the leading theory around ADHD is that there's something going on with the way that our body creates and uses dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that tells us that things are kind of as they should be and, motivate us, tell us that that dopamine is released when you win a contest, when you eat food that you really love, that kind of thing. And now that people have such insane and ongoing access to dopamine through the swiping mechanism, a lot of people, I think, are feeling that kind of ADHD feeling of having a lot of trouble focusing on things.
It seems that way. And when you talk about it the way that you've described it, I think of myself and perhaps many people out there that can sometimes have spikes in energy, lacks of focus, distraction, etc. When does it become like a spectrum versus a disorder?
I am personally of the mindset that it's rarely so cut and dry. I don't know that people either have ADHD or they don't. In my mind, it's kind of a spectrum we're all somewhere on. And rather than thinking about it when it becomes a disorder, I think about it more like when is it becoming problematic in your life? When is it stopping you from being able to do the things that you want to do? And then that's when it's probably worth seeking some kind of support for it.
Mm. It's interesting you say that because it is very much more in the media or in the
Yeah,
conversation that we have now. I think a lot of people have a trait or some traits of ADHD, and they kind of say, "Oh, therefore I
right.
have something." Whereas I think I resonate with a few of the traits, but maybe not some of the others. And it's identifying, like you said, which of those traits or behaviors maybe are affecting your life and how you can then manage it. Whether or not you're diagnosed with a disorder or whatever it's called or not. What do you think in terms of for people that might maybe not deliberately, but might use ADHD as maybe as an excuse
Mm.
to so for example, I'm late all the time. I'm one of those people. I was 1 minute late today. I don't know why. So what point is it something we can take control of?
You're asking a few questions there. I mean, I think even if someone is struggling with a particular thing, there's a difference between using it as an explanation and using it as an excuse. I
Hmm.
think we all have a responsibility to, show up for our commitments and the people in our lives. And if we're having trouble doing that for for one reason or another, it's good to understand what those reasons are, but it's still ultimately each of our jobs to figure out how to manage it. So that's one aspect of it. So I guess again, the word control is kind of complicated there. I think we all have agency. I tell people to strive for agency instead of control because we don't really have control over very much in this wild universe, but we do have agency. We do each have the ability to decide what do I want to shift or change in my life? How do I want to show up? What do I want to take responsibility for versus not? And so rather than us grasping for control, I think we should be thinking about what that agency looks like in our life. And, whether you have a disorder or not, you're going to drop the ball some of the time and you're going to, surprise yourself some of the time. So to me, it's kind of an ongoing individual journey in that way.
I wonder if it's also coming back to your point about having cell phones and the way that we interact in the world. It is an individual journey, but I also wonder if it's a societal journey, in that one of the reasons why people may struggle with focus and discipline and timeliness is because of all of the additional pressures and stimulus that we have now that we didn't have for millennia. What do you think on that side?
You're speaking to such an important point, which is everything is really a social and societal issue in a way. It's there's a catch-22 here because it is very difficult to create a healthy society without healthy individuals, but it is almost impossible to be healthy as an individual within an unhealthy society. And so, in a way, I think each of us has some responsibility to try to tackle both fronts, to take care of yourself in order to take care of those around you, but to also figure out how we can improve our social system. And I have a lot of empathy for myself and every single other person who is trying to figure out how to show up healthy in an unhealthy, world sometimes. It's a really hard thing to do.
I was thinking of myself at a buffet line, just stacking my plate full of cheesecake, justifying it that I need this so I don't turn into a werewolf. Sometimes, like, I can get away with like less sleep or skip a meal or something like that when the world is humming along smoothly. But then when there are those blindsided
Hmm.
moments, like unexpected inconvenience or something like that, that's when I realized like, uh-oh, I probably should have ate something or I probably should have slept more. And so it's now I'm aware of the responsibility that I have to society to kind of make sure I cross my T's and dot my I's for those unexpected moments because I can rationalize like, oh, I can cheat a little bit here, cut a few corners here. But then when those unexpected things happen, I'm diminished and therefore and I'm still responsible. So sometimes it's nice to have a socially acceptable label that I could throw out there. Oh, this is just my insert X. And you can kind of get a pass. But I don't know if that scales. Certainly not, by 8 billion people. So Yeah, I think you brought up a really interesting chicken and egg scenario there. When you're talking to Becky, I was thinking back like pre modern era, like what, if I have this like cubicle that is just like all my favorite shows and all my favorite like perspectives and stuff like this echoed back to me, I can feel special and distinct. But if I'm in like this little village that like I don't have, I don't get to think about David's imaginary time 8 hours a day. I have to just go farm or I have to go fight or something like that. It's almost like I'm not trying to make an argument, by the way, for going back to the Middle Ages. I'm just exploring kind of what was the delta, like what trade offs did we have when I didn't get to think about how I feel all day and
Mm,
just had to act. I think there are trade-offs. I think there are benefits and detriments to either, and it's just a matter of being aware. And that awareness, I think, is something I'm personally working on and getting those tendrils into. Can I get like an early warning system when I'm low on blood sugar or low on sleep or something like that, so that I can act right? And you think of like the braking system on bullet trains that have like sensors for earthquakes. There's like a fast moving kind of signal, so they can engage before the more destructive signal arrives. Um, that was a lot. I just had like all this stuff that came up. I just wanted to share. That wasn't really a question. I do have a question though that I'll pivot to now. Um,
Well,
y-
really quick, I want to speak to a
Please,
lot of what
yeah.
you said there, which is I think you've just described exactly why I am such a proponent of this concept of emotional fitness.
Mm,
That we tend to be very reactive with our health.
mm,
And in recent, decades, people are starting to understand that with physical health, it's going to cost you a lot more to wait till you're sick and then try to fix it than it is to be proactive and work out and eat healthy and sleep enough and try to prevent disease instead of fixing it. And I am trying to spread the idea that this is just as important with our emotional health, that we need to be more proactive. We need to be doing the work a little bit every day instead of waiting until things fall apart and then trying to deal with them. Let's invest in our emotional health a little bit all the time. And then when life does inevitably throw things at you, which it will, you will be much more set up to handle it, to move through it with, grace and health.
You're speaking to receptive ears now because I have the experience of living through the embarrassment of like losing my faculties.
Mm.
But how do you instill that with the innocent, with people that haven't yet realized the cost of not doing something?
I don't know. I think we've all probably realized the cost. Maybe we're not aware of it, but if you've ever struggled with something that you weren't prepared for, if life ever served something up for you that you felt really overwhelmed by, then you know that sometimes we just don't see things coming. And I hear what you're saying, though, that what's complicated about emotional fitness is there is a bit of a trust the process aspect of it. It's a little bit less quantitative than physical health, but, you know, essentially what I try to show is through examples and exercises and everything, what a
Hmm.
huge difference it will make if you invest in it, and especially for entrepreneurs. I mean, this is the community that I normed all of my research on, essentially. You should be investing in your emotional fitness as a business asset because business is just a series of relationships, and the relationship you have with yourself and other people is going to dramatically affect how your business does, and the way that you keep your relationships healthy is emotional fitness.
Why do you think that psychology, how the human mind works, and how that has a chain reaction and knock on effect for how we perceive our environment, isn't taught in like primary and secondary school to the degree that some other subjects are taught?
Oh, I mean, you are asking a question I've been asking myself for years and years. I think it's wild that it's not taught. I think it's absolutely hugely missing the mark that we don't have empathy classes in school, that we don't have EQ, that we don't have conflict resolution, communication, that we're not teaching people how to ask hard questions of themselves and sit with uncomfortable feelings. The world would be so different if we were doing these things. And I think we don't do it because it's a very uncomfortable and vulnerable thing to do. People don't necessarily want to lean into all of those things. And if you weren't taught how to do it, it's going to be really hard for you to teach other people how to do it. I've certainly said that. I've said we should be teaching these things in schools, and I'll get pushback. People will say, oh, well, that's a parent's job to teach a kid those things. But most parents weren't taught by their parents how to do those things. So
Mm.
I think school would be a really lovely place for that. And I'm starting to see more initiatives like that. Um, Kevin Love, the NBA superstar extraordinaire who's big in mental health, he has a foundation that is creating EQ classes for children right now. So it's starting to happen.
Nice.
I think I'm so with you on this. I think it fits into a similar bucket as to finances that are also
Yes.
things that are taught in the home but not at school, assuming that people at home just know what to do. Maybe sex education as well, like
Yes.
stuff that you want everybody in society to be able to have at least some level of knowledge on those things or practice in those things before they reach adulthood. And we don't do that. And I'm not saying, because I know a lot of people say, why do we learn algebra, but we don't learn this? Don't take away algebra. We need that too. But introduce these other things that help society to be more healthy, coming back to your point there.
Yeah, I could not agree more, truly.
So I had a question on emotional fitness versus physical fitness.
Sure.
So with physical fitness, you might, let's say, for example, you go to the gym and you do pull ups for a long time or over time. And you're getting stronger at that. You're building specific muscles. But what you're also doing, coming back to the point about being ready for the unexpected, is if one day you have to run away from a zombie, you can lift your own weight up. With emotional fitness, is it a similar kind of thing in that we're doing the same thing over and over again to get ourselves to the position that we are ready to do that thing in action if we need to?
I just love how you're illustrating the I feel like you just really understand. I think you've put beautiful words to it. So with physical fitness, what you said is happening, right? You're getting stronger in case you need your body for something later. But there's other things you're doing with physical fitness too. You're more likely to fight disease because your body is going to be in a better shape. You know, you're less likely to get sick if you are physically fit. And you're also going to be stronger just in your everyday life. You're going to be able to carry your groceries and lift up your kid and be able to go long distances without getting tired, et cetera, et cetera. So there are both immediate, distant, and what if benefits to physical health. The same is true with our emotional fitness. When you are working out your emotional health, not only will you have stronger emotional health in the moment, your relationships will get stronger, etc., but you are also less likely to have mental health struggles later because things like depression, anxiety, and stress are often a buildup of all of the things that you have not felt and faced and dealt with in the moment. And so the more you get good at feeling your feelings and working through your emotional stuff as it happens, the less you are likely to hit an emotional wall down the roads. It's like burnout. If you rest a little bit every day, you're probably not going to get burnt out later. So there really are both immediate and long term. And then there are also the worst case scenario benefits. When the pandemic hit, I can tell you that the people who had done a lot of work on their emotional fitness were probably a little bit more equipped to get through what was a really difficult emotional situation than the people who had never given it any thought.
Hmm. David, do you want to jump in there? Or...
Yeah, I was just thinking, kind of tangentially. Recently, I heard an interview with Eddie Vedder, who's a lead singer for this band called Pearl Jam,
Oh, yes, I've heard of
in the grunge
it.
era. He's well, that more toward the global audience, I suppose, depending on when they come across this episode. But he lost a lot of friends. He lost a lot of contemporaries in that era, and it could be kind of the blues kind of adage where it you dip into some of those uncomfortable feelings, and that's where like it fuels your artwork and the creativity and stuff. But to some people that maybe don't understand depression, I guess with a capital D, it can seem kind of confusing to the outside. When you've been happy, you've been sad. It's like you look at someone who's really handsome and really successful and just surrounded by, what looks like a perfect hallmark life, accolades, etc. And then, they're no longer with us prematurely, and it's very confusing. Um, and I don't want to necessarily focus too much on that. That could be a whole can of worms in and of itself. But just when you mention like mental fitness, and I don't think you mentioned like mental hygiene or something like that, but that's something that kind of comes to mind is these routines or exercises you can do. Um, what like what do you think is missing, I guess, in modern society that allows for just these gutter balls?
Yeah. You spoke to something there that feels really important, which is many of us have this idea that when we line up certain external realities for ourselves, we will feel content, happy, fulfilled. And what I've seen working with a lot of really high powered, successful entrepreneurs is that it's generally not those external factors that bring those things. I was just having a conversation with Alex Lieberman, who sold Morning Brew for, tens of millions
Yeah.
of dollars. And he was saying essentially, like, that's the most depressed I've ever been was when I got all that money because I woke up and I thought, all right, well, now what? Because I'm not totally happy and fulfilled, and all of my dreams are not suddenly coming true, and all of my pain is not suddenly gone. And now I don't even know what to strive for anymore because I've kind of done it. And same with these rock stars, I think they achieve all of this fame and their problems don't all go away. And that can be really overwhelming and disconcerting. And so in my mind, the change we need to make is to, as perhaps trite as this might sound, we need to accept that really it's the internal shifts that lead to the feelings of fulfillment and contentment and joy and all of that. And I don't think that we are encouraged to prioritize those things. And, especially anyone who's experienced trauma or who grew up in a difficult situation, there's just a whole lot of built up stuff that would need to be addressed that's not going to go away just because you get rich or famous or whatever it might be. And so, again, that's what emotional fitness is all about. It's about working those things through as you go.
Maybe a little taste or teaser for the audience. What's like it's counterintuitive. If you were to ask people like a simple survey, like you mentioned, like your life looks like this. Would you like it to look like something else? Well, oftentimes I'll volunteer that. I'd like help getting my life from where it is to over here. And you're like, okay, well, you need to do these things, and then there's like this hesitancy or this a reluctance to change what is making the environment that they don't like. Does that make sense? Like why it just seems kind of funny when you look at it like in the third person. It's like you eating, you know, hamburgers saying you would like to drink water. And I'm like, well, put down the hamburger and drink
Mm.
some water. And you're like, it's not happening. I don't want to. So does that make sense? Like,
Oh, yeah.
why is that?
It makes so much sense. Something I say a lot is most people don't go to therapy because they don't know what to do. Most people go to therapy because they do know what to do, but need help understanding why they're not doing it. I don't
Mm.
think most of the change we need to make is just about understanding what change needs to be made. I think it's about all of the complicated reasons why we are standing in the way of making that change for ourselves. And that gets very complicated, when you are invested in doing things in a particular way, when your discomfort is familiar to you, when you were not given the support or resources to act in a different way, it's not actually that easy to change. And I think that's why I have a lot of empathy for people, even the people kind of out there doing the worst things in the world. I know that we are the way we are for reasons. And everything that makes a person frustrating or annoying or unhealthy or whatever it might be, ironically served them at some point in their life. It was the best choice they had at some point, and that's very complicated to change. And so that's the thing about our health is that it requires us to withstand quite a bit of discomfort and move through things that are just not easy to do.
I've so much I want to unpack. I've written down like 9 different questions. But picking up on the last thing that you've just said there. So, coming from a British culture of keep calm and carry on, don't
Right.
talk about it, stiff upper lip kind of thing. There is it's leaving the millennials and Gen Z are much more open and much more okay to go to therapy or have coaching or whatever. The older generations, my dad, I'm thinking of in particular, would be, why do you need to talk about it? Why do you need, if you're fine, if you're functional, why do you need to talk about it? And I wonder if there is a line between if I talk about it all the time and I focus on what's negative all the time and how negative I feel all the time, that can't help me. But if I never talk about it and I don't process it at all, then that can't help me either. So where is that line for the Brits that might be listening, or
or
anyone really?
anyone.
Mm,
I mean, so I have a whole chapter in my book essentially about this, which is we have to find sort of the complicated pendulum swing between feeling our feelings so much that we're stuck in them and we can't do
mhm,
anything else versus avoiding our feelings so much that they're just kind of controlling us from the inside. And my experience is that most people err more to the side of not feeling their feelings enough. And especially when they first get this advice that they should be feeling their feelings more, they have a lifetime of unfelt feelings that they have to feel through. And so it feels like so much and it feels like it's not going to be helpful. But that actually, what we, I think, really know is that the emotions we don't let ourselves experience build up inside us and we carry them around with us all the time. And they find all kinds of ways to be known and to act out in ways that aren't helpful. And that when to the mental hygiene point, when you find little moments throughout your day to let yourself feel what you are feeling, then you reduce that buildup and it stops being a problem over time. But when you go from not being that way to being that way, it's going to feel like a lot and overwhelming and like maybe it's not helping. So in the book, I talk about this idea of emotional push-ups, these little exercises you can do every day to increase your emotional fitness. And one of them is just as simple as the next time you catch yourself saying, oh, I shouldn't feel that way, instead just take 5 minutes and feel it without judgment, without having to fix it, without asking it to go away. You can set a timer if you're worried about it going too far, but just be sad, be angry, be worried, whatever you need to feel for a moment. Actually let yourself feel it. And what you'll often notice is that it passes. It passes through. You're actually feeling through something. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time telling themselves they should stop feeling. And I think if we all instead leaned toward our emotions more, things would change in a huge way.
what would you say about, because I would imagine people process their feelings in different ways. For me, I'm very vocal. I need to get it
Uh-huh.
out of my mouth. Other
Sure.
people might write it down or they might want to just be silent. I'm thinking, like, for me, the vocal person,
Hmm.
if I were angry, say, there's a part of me that would say, but don't do that if you're around other people, right? Don't feel the feeling if you're around other people. But I guess in a way that's not real life. That's not, again, that's maybe a societal thing, but there's also not other people's responsibility or shouldn't be their burden to experience me feeling my feelings. So again, where's that line there?
Yeah, I mean, we need the appropriate venue to feel our feelings. If you're in the middle of a meeting, it's not the time to express all of your anger, probably. But when we don't find and create the space for that, then those do become the places that things happen. So I recommend set some time aside in your day. And I agree with you. People process emotions differently. If you're a person who likes to talk about it, then therapy is a great example of a place to do that, or finding other like minded individuals who want to talk about things with you. Writing is an incredible way to move emotions through your body. A lot of people are more somatic. They need to actually move their bodies in order to move the feelings through their bodies. Sometimes people have trouble accessing their feelings, and maybe they need to listen to some sad music or a sad movie and let themselves just cry about the movie, but likely they're also crying about all of the other feelings that they haven't really let out. If you set that time aside, and this is why I think therapy is so powerful. It is a designated time every week to feel your feelings. Then they will stop being as problematic the rest of the time.
And it's also with somebody that is choosing to be there with you, right? As in,
Right.
it's not, I'm going to sit down with my spouse, my friend, my whatever, and just unload onto them. It's a space that's a mutually agreed space to do that.
Exactly. They're a witness, but they're also trained to help you understand those feelings, to draw patterns over time, and to help you figure out what to do in those moments with those emotions.
Have you ever seen the movie A Fish Called Wanda?
Oh my gosh. I think when I was really young, I did, but I don't remember it well.
Well, Kevin Kline won an Academy Award for it. It's a comedy. It's hilarious.
Okay.
It takes place in the UK, and Kevin Kline is an American. And he's driving. He insists on driving on what we would call the right side of the road, what the British would call the improper side of the road or the incorrect side of the road. It's just funny, like cartoon style humor. But that's often how life is. I've found in my own journey of getting better maps that I've been giving away data that tells you that the script goes this way. And then I'm confused, upset when we don't arrive at the ending that I wanted for that story. And as I learn about, oh, this is what I'm signaling, and we're having this kind of, it's almost like we're a group organism, human beings, like but simultaneously individual and a group organism. And sometimes we discount or are blind to some of the feedback that we're receiving from the audience. And as you start to kind of learn, it's almost like an extra sense or like a mini superpower where it's like, whoa, I have like ultraviolet vision now or something. And you want to run around to the whole village screaming like, hey, we can do this now. And I think back when I was young and learned that, cover your ears, folks that still believe this, but the Santa Claus was a fiction. I wanted to tell everyone in the neighborhood. It's kind of like I have a similar feeling when I notice someone doing something that I once did. I
Mm.
want to like give them like the next three chapters. Um, you, I'm sure, have a lot that you notice um, and could say. And I imagine that you don't. But how do you how do you arrive at what you think is the most rising tide lifts all boats framing for our collective imperfect spectra of mapping and behavior?
I heard something years ago that said, advice is spoken in the language of experience. So if you're trying to give advice to someone who hasn't had the same experience as you, they're not going to be able to understand and take that in. And that's one thing I've really come to understand is, again, it's easy to say, here's what you should do different, but there are reasons people aren't doing those things differently. And until they have the space to understand those reasons, it will be hard for them to change. So in my experience, if we want other people to change, the best thing we can do is to work on ourselves and then to be loud and transparent about it. I was telling everyone who would listen about my therapy way before people were talking about therapy. And I was telling them, here's what I'm talking about, and here are the epiphanies that I'm having, and here's how my life has changed as a result, and here's why I think it's so meaningful. And what people would often do is come back to me and say, I was thinking about how this seems to be working so well for you. And, you seem to be doing pretty well in life, and you're in therapy. So I don't know why I wouldn't be in therapy. Maybe you should help me get into therapy. So that truly, I think we have to kind of be the change in that way, because you can tell people to change all day, but until they feel ready to do the work that would make it possible, it's going to fall on deaf ears.
Could you talk a bit about your research on the 7 traits of emotional fitness? Which trait, for example, do you see as most underdeveloped in entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and why?
Sure. So, the 7 traits of emotional fitness came from research that I did years ago. I interviewed 100 psychologists and 100 entrepreneurs, and I asked them the question, how would you know if you were sitting across the table from an emotionally healthy leader and really just an emotionally healthy person? And I coded all of these interviews for themes. And what came out of them are these 7 traits of emotional fitness, the 7 things that emotionally healthy people are working on all the time. And to go through those 7 things, they are mindfulness, curiosity, self awareness, resilience, empathy, communication, and playfulness. And so in my book, I run people through these 7 traits and help you understand how can you flex your muscles in each of these areas and why is that worth doing. And then tell me again the second part of your question.
Well, which do you think is
Oh,
most
yes.
underdeveloped and why?
Right. So the thing about emotional fitness is it's not a one size fits all practice. I don't think there is any one trait that is most underdeveloped by all people. I think people tend to have their strengths and their areas of growth within these 7 traits. And then even within each trait, it might be situation dependent, or it might be, some people are good verbal communicators, but they're not good at texting. Some people are really good at listening, but they're not as good at sharing about themselves, that kind of thing. So within each of those traits, there's sort of an individual journey. But they all start with mindfulness. And I define mindfulness as becoming more comfortable being uncomfortable. And to me, this is the most foundational one because emotional fitness, like physical fitness, is an uncomfortable practice. If you walked into the gym and said, all right, I'm going to work out, but I'm going to stop as soon as I'm uncomfortable, you're never going to get stronger. You're never going to get faster. And the same is true with emotional fitness. You first have to wrap your mind around the fact that it's not always going to feel great to do it. But if you do, not only will you expand your ability to tolerate that discomfort, you will also get stronger and see all kinds of benefits in your life. So that's where I tell people to start is finding what things in their life make them a little more uncomfortable than they seem to make other people and figuring out how to lean toward that discomfort instead of away from it.
I think oftentimes there's a temptation to label and categorize just for like quick heuristics and sense making. So with that caveat aside, I might be at risk of doing the same thing, but um, I I think that you really only cheat yourself. So I was thinking like if someone picks up your 7 traits, could they mimic mental fitness? Could they present as mentally fit? Let's say there's some reason to. And I was thinking you're even if you successfully fool someone into thinking that you're playful and empathetic and this and that, let's say you get to level 2 or level 3, eventually you're facing harder bosses and you're under equipped because you were really only fooling yourself. Now there is some externalized cost if you have a team or people relying on you to lead and you're not capable. I'm curious, this is kind of like, I guess, ethical, societal kind of just uh, sketching or framing, but what are your what are your thoughts on leadership and subterfuge, like the kind of chameleon manipulation games that sometimes exist in the jungle? Um, I I find myself I would like to live in a world where everyone has the 7 traits and full display authentically, but it doesn't seem like that's the world that we live in. It seems that there are leaders that do that, and there are leaders that don't, and each is successful. And I'm curious, and maybe this is not really your repertoire, but from one human to another, especially one who specializes in psychology, do you think that that's a bad thing, or do you think that's like what it is? Sometimes there's volcanic eruptions, sometimes there's tidal waves, and you've got to navigate the space in between.
What I would call into question is this idea of what makes someone successful. Are there people making a lot of money in our capitalistic society without these 7 traits? Sure. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that aspect of our society is the healthiest thing. And I measure success in really different ways. To me, success is about how healthy your relationships are, how authentically happy you are in your life. And, you know, I would argue that a lot of these people that society sees as really successful because they're making so much money, they're often not all that happy with their life, and they often do not have especially healthy relationships. When I talk to people, everyone's like, "Well, what about Steve Jobs? He was so successful." And it's like, "Yeah, but have you read his biography? He sounded pretty miserable."
Have you
And it
spoken
sounded
to him
like
lately?
a lot of people in his life didn't care for him in various ways. And to me, that's not what a successful life looks like. So if your main goal is just to make as much money as possible, I do think these 7 traits will still help you in the long run, but they're not the only way. You can cut, if you're willing to be a manipulator and a liar, you're going to get far in life in some ways, but not in others. Right. So I think it's more about figuring out what success actually means to you. The other thing is, I don't think it's so easy to fake these things. It's like faking being fast. You can say that you're fast, but when it's time to actually run the race, if you're not fast, everyone's going to know that. And I feel the same is true. There are a lot of people out there saying that they're really self aware, but you can tell when they're not self aware. There are a lot of
Is
people
that
saying
something
that they're
self-aware people say?
exactly. If anything, the more self aware you are, the more you realize how much you don't know. So, yeah, so maybe I'd ask how that lands with you if we're
That was an
basing it all on.
expert framing. Thank you for
Okay.
putting together a very messy question. A lot of curious kind of thoughts came up,
Yeah.
especially with like media these days. Like a lot of the sensational like movies and TV shows deal with some of these
Mm,
darker subject matters because it makes for good drama and intrigue. And some of it is based on reality. And when you're in a competitive environment, you want to, I think, understand the tools and like like if it's sports, for example, you can play this way, but
mhm,
these are some of the results of that, because I do think there's a consequence to everything.
right.
And So yeah, I like the way that you frame that. And I could last question before I don't want to hog too much, but so Becky and I sometimes have these like philosophical conversations, and just kind of like emptying lint, pocket lint on the table, and kind of like or looking at the clouds and seeing like shapes or whatever. Um, Cure for cancer, fast and light travel, like these kind of extreme discoveries. Like you mentioned Steve Jobs. I mentioned like blues earlier, and dipping into some of like the negative, let's say, or I don't know if negative is even an accurate word, but like, the not happy feelings for fuel for just outsized progress. Do you think that, do you think we can be like a really productive society if everyone's happy?
Well, you're bringing up such an important point, which is the goal of emotional fitness is not happiness.
Good point.
Happiness is an elevated state. We are not meant to exist in happiness all the time. Happiness is one of many important, healthy human emotions. In my mind, emotional fitness is not about being happy all the time. It's about being able to experience the full range of human emotion because they all exist for a reason. They're all really important. And it's not about living a life without suffering. Life includes suffering. That is inevitable. There will always be suffering to be had, no matter how emotionally fit you are. But emotional fitness is going to change the way you relate to that suffering and how much it pulls you down instead of helps you grow and helps you feel your full humanity. So I think that we will always have that. And the other thing is, I will say I do get a lot of artists or people who say, if I fix my depression, then I won't be a good artist anymore. And to me, that feels like a campaign put on by Big Depression. Like, that's not actually how things work. And in my experience, if anything, as people heal themselves, their art might change, but they don't lose their beauty. It shifts and they're often capable of much more than they ever thought they would be because now they're not spending so much of their resources just trying to survive. So I think that's a bit of a misconception about what fuels some of these things.
That was really nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you were talking, Emily, about the experiencing the spectrum of human emotions because they're all important, it made me think of Inside Out, the Disney
Oh, yeah.
movie,
Great movie.
and Inside Out 2 as well. Have you seen them, David?
No, no,
I
I'm
would
just laughing because it's
recommend.
like you didn't see a fish called Wanda.
That Inside Out are brilliant, and I think because they make quite profound points in a Disney way, right? In a kid-friendly way. That things like anxiety being something that comes from a good place trying to keep you safe might need to sit in its chair and have a cocoa every now and then because it's not needed right now, but we value it.
Right.
And I kind of think about it as emotions being something that we experience, not who we are, and kind of separating the self from those things and seeing it as an experience that's not going to last very long. So if it's sadness, you're not always going to be sad. And if you're anxious, you're not always going to be anxious. And if you're happy, you're not always going to be happy.
Right.
So trying to see it as if it's a negative, for want of a better word, experience, no, it's not going to last forever. And if it's a positive one, then hold on to that and experience that and kind of indulge in that, I guess, in a way. I'm going to kind of divert here a little bit. It's going to sound like a really weird question based on what we've just been saying. What are your thoughts on chemical help with this, be that pharmaceutically or maybe psychedelics, and how that helps us interact with our emotions and
Hmm.
live?
Sure. So I am not anti chemical support. My problem with it is that it is often suggested as a first line of defense or an only line of defense. And there is a psychologist who I just absolutely admire. His name's Jonathan Shedler. And he talks about depression and anxiety and all of these things the way that you might think of a fever with your physical health, meaning that these disorders are not the problem in and of themselves. They are symptoms of a problem. And if all you treat is the symptom and you never pay attention to what that symptom is trying to alert you to, then you're not actually doing yourself a big service. If you walked into the doctor and you said, I've had a fever for weeks, and the doctor said, oh, well, just keep taking Tylenol. That might bring down your fever, but your body is giving you that fever because it's trying to say, hey, there's something wrong. I need you to pay attention to it. And that is what our emotions are doing as well. Our emotions are a compass. They're trying to point us to things that we need to pay attention to. And if all you do is take medication to change the chemistry of those emotions and you never pay attention to what they're trying to point you to, you're not doing yourself a service. That being said, sometimes our emotions are so overwhelming that it feels impossible to do the work because they're so intense. And so I see medication as a life raft. It is something to hold on to while you do the work. I personally think it should be illegal to prescribe psych meds if you're not also in some kind of therapy, because to me, that is like quieting a symptom without ever dealing with the problem underneath it. Psychedelics, I think, are in a little bit of a different category. But again, I don't think psychedelics should be something that people are just sent home with. It is a way to access inner truths and emotions. And there needs to be a safe and supported way to understand then what to do with all of that.
Because I've seen, and these are case study stories, so it's not necessarily got a lot of data to back it up, but I've seen stories of people that they have a macrodose of mushrooms or whatever it is with a therapist, and they basically do therapy all day, or probably what feels like all day. It's probably really 20 minutes, but it feels like it's a whole day for them. And they don't need their antidepressants for months and months and months. And it seems to be able to do a lot of work very quickly because of the different state that their brain is in. Is that, in your experience, is that something that, is that just a random person said that and it's not really backed up? Or what's your understanding of that?
Well, unfortunately, research around psychedelics is really limited because of the whole kind of war on drugs idea. And we're just now starting to really look at it. And I do think there is incredible potential in the world of psychedelics. I really do. The problem is, anytime there's potential in something, it gets very quickly co opted and bastardized by companies trying to make money off of it. And my concern now is that the way that it's being offered is not honoring the way that it actually works. Psychedelic medicine is not new. It has been used by indigenous people for much longer than we've been familiar with it. And there is ceremony and ritual around it. And there is, important aspects of it that are not necessarily being honored now. If you're just kind of sent home with a ketamine lozenge and you're never asked to process what comes from the experience, I don't think that that's ideal. And I think we need to be really thoughtful about how we introduce these things, but there's a lot of potential there for sure.
One more thing on that before I pass back over. David and I had a conversation with a guy a few months ago, and it's really stuck in my brain. He was somebody that went to a dark room for, I think it was 5 days,
But yeah.
and didn't eat and didn't, no stimulus at all. And it changed his life. His business went through the roof. His relationships got better. His health was better. And he said those 5 days were hell. Like, he really went through and processed so much. And he said it was because you've got nothing else to do. So you have to kind of unpick stuff as it comes up. I think that sounds like the worst thing possible. I don't ever want to do it myself. But what are your thoughts on those kind of more extreme ways that people could process trauma and things like that?
Our society really loves the all or nothing approach. There is so much that exists between life as you're living it now and five
Yeah.
days in a dark
Yeah.
retreat. What about just not looking at your phone after 10 p.m. and sitting quietly at your thoughts, or not having phones at dinner and just being present in that way? Or what about just the next time you feel something, sitting with it and not feeling like you have to do anything about it? I mean, these are little things that very few people do that also make that kind of difference. But there is this idea of like, well, I couldn't do that. I'm going to have to just lock myself in a cave for 5 days. And, sometimes that's how we have to do it. But I just would encourage people to understand that there are all kinds of ways that you can replicate that, which is just, what does it look like to be still and present with your inner world instead of constantly finding ways to distract yourself from it?
I'd like to talk a little bit like technical, I guess, or like literal, about writing a book. So
Okay.
your book, Flex Your Feelings, I've heard a few different ways that people go around about writing a book. So of course, you could write it yourself, or you could outsource to like an agency or ghostwriter. That's one. These days with AI, there's like a temptation to have AI write some or much of a book or something. Some people do like a newsletter, like every week, and then after like a year, they have a book that way, and many other models, I'm sure. Could you talk about how you went about writing your book.
Sure. So I'm much more comfortable as a speaker than a writer. I do a lot of public speaking, conferences, keynotes, workshops at companies, things like that. And after a talk I did about emotional fitness one day, a book agent came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, this should really be a book. Let's talk about doing that." And I hired an editor to help me take all of the things that I have talked about and figure out how to write them in a way that resonates with mainstream society, that kind of thing. So I sort of took a hybrid approach. I definitely did a lot of the writing and then also got a lot of support. Um, and so there's no necessarily right way to do it. The AI stuff is complicated because, yeah, it sounds really pretty and neat, but it loses a lot of its humanity, and I think
Right.
people are starting to get wise to that very quickly. You can feel when there isn't a person back there, and so, I think AI is a great tool, but it's not a replacement for our true minds and connection.
I agree. I think at best it's just going to be like a parallel kind of economy.
Right.
But if it, and going back to kind of that 5 days of darkness retreat, it's going to make us kind of yearn more for the human imperfection. There's this concept in Japanese art called wabi sabi,
Uh-huh.
and it's like Cindy Crawford's beauty mark kind of thing. It's like it ties everything else together. Or the Big Lebowski's rug, if you saw that one. But anyway, it's I think that I agree with you. I think that the storytelling and the the ingredients that the story is made up of needs to be kind of communicated, lived, breathed, rather than just outsourced to the machine. That said, I also don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater and
Right.
thinking that the machine's all bad. I think it can sometimes reflect back to us really interesting things about ourselves and, as I say, alien intelligence, things that maybe we new synthetic data that we can choose to interpret or not, not at the dinner table, perhaps. But what is like? What do you most hope readers walk away with after they read your book, Flex Your Feelings?
Mm. I hope that readers leave with a sense of empowerment that they are the creators of their life. People tend to think that life is happening to them. Oh, I just keep ending up with this kind of person over and over. Or, people just don't realize how much you are making all kinds of decisions that are creating your life. And with emotional fitness, you take that agency back. And so I hope people leave feeling equipped to show up as a more authentic and healthy and intentional version of themselves, and the external rewards will follow.
What's your favorite mental fitness ritual? I've heard people talk about exercise, cold plunges, darkness retreats, etc. How about you?
So the most simple one is just an ongoing checking in with yourself about things that make you uncomfortable and challenging yourself to lean toward that discomfort instead of away. But if you want a really concrete emotional push up that people could do right now, the one that I often give is take out your phone and pull up a text and address it to someone who you interact with regularly in life and whose opinion you respect, and send them a message that says something like, "Hey, I'm working on my emotional fitness, and I would love it if you'd be willing to share what is one thing I'm doing well as a friend, a mentor, a parent, a sibling, a boss, a manager, whatever. And what's one thing I could do 10% better?" And then send that text off and see what you get back. I send this text to someone in my life every single month. There is something very powerful about feedback and about seeing the ways that people appreciate you and also the things that you could do a little bit better. It's like a retro for your relationships. They will often ask for feedback back. And now you have this reciprocal permission to be improving how you show up for each other. And it will increase self awareness. It will improve communication, all kinds of important things. So that's a great push up to start.
That's great. Becky and I both are involved in coaching. So Becky's a sales and like presentation coach. I'm an executive coach. Um, and there's, I mean, many different types of coaching, many different philosophies, but generally speaking, my understanding is that coaching isn't giving advice. It's not consulting. It's not therapy. In a sense, it's helping people fish for themselves, and you're asking strategic questions to help them access data that they already have. And it sounds perhaps like a cop out, but if done well, it's like I can't scratch the middle of my back. Like I need you to do it for me. Um, and what you're doing is a little bit more, I'd say, what certainly can seem more, let's say, serious, high stakes. Um, Also in coaching, there's this, I'd say, misconception that you should only seek out coaching when there's a problem. So, if you're seeking out coaching, you're essentially admitting that you have a problem, which can like have all sorts of taboos or uncomfortable feelings. And I don't think that has to be the case. Sometimes it could be additive rather than, corrective. Um, what are your thoughts as a therapist, as a psychologist, um, regarding psychology? Is it similar that do you think that people really only should seek it out when there's a problem, or can they also seek it out as just part of mental hygiene?
So, really, emotional fitness is based on exactly what you've said, which is that we should not wait until things are really falling apart to work on ourselves in this way. I almost would think about it like you wouldn't wait until you have the flu to go to the gym. When you have the flu, you have to get back to baseline before you can get any stronger than you were before. And what I often see is people wait until things are really wrong to work on themselves, at which point the work is going to be just getting you back to baseline. And don't get me wrong, that's a good time to get support if you need help getting back to baseline. But if you go to therapy and do this work when things are mostly fine, then you're not just getting back to baseline, you are getting stronger. You are going to prevent the things that might have sent you seeking for support later. So that proactive approach is going to save you so much time and resources down the line. I think every entrepreneur should consider doing therapy, doing coaching, because you will inevitably face difficult things and you will be so much better equipped to deal with them if you've already been doing the work.
Well said. The book is Flex Your Feelings. I imagine people can buy it anywhere books are sold.
Yes.
Where can people follow what you're doing, get in touch with you, etc.?
Yes, so I'm on all the socials. My handle is at Dr. Emily Anhalt. Find me on there. Let's connect. My website is dremilyanhalt.com. And the book is called Flex Your Feelings, Train Your Brain to Develop the 7 Traits of Emotional Fitness. And yes, you can find that anywhere.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Emily. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you two prioritizing this, and it's been great to talk.